We are into this week's Advent sermon series, 23andHe, the genealogy of Jesus, during which Pastor Jacob and I are delving deep into the Gospel of Matthew's opening chapter. It's one long list of a family tree and all of its branches that link Jesus Christ all the way back to Abraham, our ancestor, who first entered a covenant with God. And specifically during this sermon series, we're highlighting the 5 women who appear on this list, because as Pastor Jacob noted last week, each of them has a very surprising and unique, and in a few cases scandalous, story attached to them. Now, Pastor Jacob promised we won't read the entire long genealogy list every week, but I am going to read just the first part today so we can examine this woman and the way her name is recorded here, because, spoiler alert, that is absolutely key to understanding who she was and how our ancestors viewed her and how her story impacts us today. So here we go. This comes from Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Aminadab, and Aminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon was the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph. Did you catch that? David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. This woman, of course, is named Bathsheba, but the scribes have documented this lineage for millennia, and they have chosen to identify her as the wife of Uriah. Now, before we all start shaking our fist at the patriarchy, because this woman is listed by her husband's name, so not okay in 2023, by the way, let's stop and refresh ourselves on Bathsheba's story, which begins in 2 Samuel chapter 11. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman. It was reported, "This is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So David sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself after her period. Then she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." So I know we're in our second week of Advent, and we're all listening to sweet Christmas carols, and we're baking cookies, and we're having our hearts warmed by cocoa and holiday traditions right now. But I need you to go with me this morning to a really bleak, really disturbing, sad place for just a few minutes, and then I promise I will deliver us all back safely and happily to the warmth of Advent cheer. Okay? Do you trust me? Okay, let's do this. Bathsheba's story begins with King David staying home from a battle in an ongoing war with the Ammonites and the Arameans. We don't know why King David stayed home from this battle. Maybe he was tired, but maybe he felt like his status afforded him a break while his troops continued to fight it out. In any case, he remains in Jerusalem in his palace, shirking his responsibilities as king. So he's lounging on his rooftop, sipping a Mai Tai, and he looks over along his city, the rooftops of his city, and he sees a woman bathing named Bathsheba. And he sends his messengers to retrieve her, although a better translation is to take her. So he takes her by force, and I don't want to mince my words here. David is abusing his power as king, and he sexually assaults Bathsheba, who has no power to consent to these advances. Now, I told you we had to go to a really heavy place in order to honestly tell Bathsheba's story. And it should be noted here that David already had 7 wives, as well as servants and slaves and prostitutes. That's all recorded in our scripture. Again, why is To Kill a Mockingbird banned in schools? So King David is a collector of women, and he also has 20 children by these women at this point in the story. He already has 20 children. So one thing we know for sure is that if King David lived today, he would definitely have his own TLC show. So King David has this lust for appetite. He just wants power and more acquisition, and anything that could be considered healthy is far exceeded at this point in his life. So he decides that he wants and therefore shall have this woman, Bathsheba. And he assaults her because he's the king and he can do that. But then his sin with Bathsheba begins to snowball. She gets pregnant. Ugh. That doesn't look good for a king who impregnated one of his own soldiers' wives, especially when he already had 7 wives of his own, and especially when his troops were out to war and he's just traipsing around his palace. So King David schemes and he says, here's what I'll do. I'll bring Bathsheba's husband Uriah home from the battlefield to spend the night with his wife. And then, in 9 or so months, when the baby is born, everyone will assume that it was conceived that night when he came home from battle. It's pretty sneaky, right? But it doesn't work. He brings Uriah home, and Uriah is so faithful and so dedicated to his God and to his king and his fellow soldiers that he refuses to enter the comfort of his own home, and he sleeps out on the street. David's plan is thwarted. But he schemes again, and he says, okay, this is nothing that a little alcohol can't fix. So he gets Uriah drunk, and he gives him a little nudge towards his door. And again, Uriah's like holding onto the doorpost. He's like, I'm not going in the house. David's like, this is becoming a real problem, Uriah. So now he's really sweating. He is refusing to let King David cover up his sin and rewrite this ugly narrative. So David decides that desperate times call for desperate measures, and he sends Uriah to the front line of the battle and has him killed. Now, David can pretend to have compassion on Uriah's widow, Bathsheba, and marry her as wife number 8. And that's what he does. So Uriah is killed, and Bathsheba is forced to marry her rapist, King David, to cover up his crime. This is pretty ugly, right? This is pretty heavy stuff. And the family drama just continues with all kinds of problems and issues because King David's own sons have really messy lives. You can continue reading about this story. But it's because of this messy, disturbing background that Bathsheba's recorded presence in the genealogy of Jesus is all the more incredible. You see, the scribes who chose to continue mentioning her record her in translation after translation, not just as Bathsheba, and they definitely don't call her King David's wife, although that's who she becomes in this narrative. They list her as the wife of Uriah. I don't know if you get goosebumps when you think about that, but I do every time. The scribes of our holy scriptures have chosen to acknowledge that this woman was someone else's wife before King David stole her away and murdered her husband. This woman had entered into the covenant of marriage with another man before King David interrupted her life and displaced her from her home. This woman had built a foundation with another man, a man named Uriah, and who knows what they had planned for their future together before King David decided that his wants and his needs were more important than anyone else's. Were Bathsheba and Uriah deeply in love? Were they planning to have children together? Did they pray together each night before falling asleep side by side? Was she deeply concerned about his safety on the battlefield every day that he was gone? The truth is, we don't know anything about their marriage except that it was destroyed by King David one careless afternoon. And it would be so easy to gloss over this story and paint Bathsheba in any light that we want to. But our scribes used the power of their pens or their quills, or whatever writing instrument they had, to title her in a way that both calls out King David's sin and firmly roots Bathsheba's identity in her context before she was cruelly taken from her home and made a pawn in the king's game of entitlement. This is huge. As we have planned and discussed this sermon series, Jacob and I keep asking each other, who do you think these scribes were? And my only conclusion is that either they were women or they consulted with women. I guess the third option is that they were really progressive proto-feminist men. In any case, their refusal to shy away from embarrassing, uncomfortable, and ugly stories in Jesus' genealogy tells us so much about their view of Christ and the importance of telling the truth as people of faith. I know there's so much pressure at all times, but especially during the holidays, to be perfect. To craft the most beautiful cards with the perfect family photos in which everyone is at least looking at the camera, if not smiling. To write the perfect Christmas letter that highlights all of the best things that happened to us this year, and to either minimize the hard things that happened or just skip them all together. Every year, my family had this tradition of gathering around to read the Christmas letter of another family from our hometown and count the number of superlatives that the matriarch who wrote the letter would use in her mini novel disguised as a Christmas letter. Her children are always the best, the brightest, the highest paid doctors, graduating with the highest honors from the best medical schools. They are the happiest they have ever been. They are the healthiest they could possibly be, and they have traveled the furthest to the most exotic places and had the best times doing it. Whatever they're doing that year, they're excelling at it, whether it's golfing, tennis, or pickleball. The letter is always accompanied by photos of them grinning from ear to ear to prove that they are not just getting by, but they are knocking this thing called life out of the park, the biggest and the best park. I wonder if this holiday season we might take a different approach, one that's more in line with the tradition of our faith, the tradition of our scribes. I wonder if this year we might acknowledge the parts of our family tree and our lives that aren't so perfect. I wonder if this year we might raise a glass in honor of Aunt Agnes, who struggled with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. I wonder if we might make a toast to Cousin Dwayne, who is currently incarcerated. I wonder if we might take a moment by the Christmas fireside to remember Uncle Harvey, who lived with depression and died by suicide. I wonder if we might invite our loved ones during our Christmas dinner to each go around the table and share a favorite memory of our great-grandmother who battled alcoholism her whole adult life. I wonder if we might call a family member, and in addition to wishing them a happy holiday season, we might acknowledge their abuse as a child. I wonder if we might say something like, I want you to know that I know what you lived through, and I'm here for you if you ever want to talk about it further to process it. And I'm in awe of your resilience. I wonder if we might email the recent divorcee in our family and write, I know this Christmas is going to be different for you, and I want you to know that I'm thinking of you, and I'm holding space for your pain. You are not alone. I wonder if we might take some time in the midst of all of our merrymaking this year and proclaim that our lives do not need to be perfect in order for them to be meaningful and whole and valuable. Our scribes, the ancient recorders of our faith, the people who first decided which stories were important enough to pass down from generation to generation to generation, to try and make sense of life and God and community and humanity, felt that this practice of telling the truth, of not shying away from what really happened and who lived and who died and how it all went down, was critical to living faithfully. So this year, I invite us to do the same, to free ourselves from any shame or secrecy about the things in our past or our present that are imperfect, and to instead see how those wounds and those scars are part of the tapestry that connect us to one another and also connect us to Jesus, the one who is coming this Christmas to remind us that through it all, God is with us. Amen.